20 years ago today since the devastating terrorist attacks on the London transport system when 52 people died and almost 800 others were injured and maimed when 4 Islamist terrorists detonated suicide bombs on the London Underground and also on a double-decker bus. And now Home and Security editor Mark White takes a deeply personal look back at the tragedy he lived through and reported on at the time, an atrocity that marked the first use of suicide bombings here in the UK.
Something's gone badly wrong. We really don't know at the moment. It's loud bangs.
We need ambulances and water to King's Cross.
I understand what you're saying.
And Russell Square. Russell Square is
We're going to have it as a major incident, so we'll get ambulances to you wherever I can.
Okay, thanks, mate.
Go down to the home.
An attack in the heart of our capital city. The London bombings were designed to strike commuters at the height of rush hour. 3 underground trains and a bus were the targets. But as shocking as this mass casualty attack was, it also marked a sinister turn in the threat Britain now faced. The first suicide bombings in this country. So many people here in London and far beyond have stories to tell about the horrors of 7/7. For me, it was quite literally the day Islamist terrorism landed on my doorstep. Around the time of 7/7, I was living in this apartment block. That iconic red double-decker bus blew up just yards further up the road there. And Russell Square, another blast site, is just across the road. It was a Piccadilly line train between King's Cross and Russell Square which saw the greatest loss of life. 26 died here.
I'm the supervisor of Aldgate. We've just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
There may be fatalities. We don't know anything about that.
Another 7 were killed near Aldgate Station in East London. 6 died at Edgware Road Station in West London. And 13 lost their lives when a double-decker bus was blown up at Tavistock Square, just yards from the site of the blast at Russell Square. Russell Square was my local tube station. On 7/7, I was fortunate to be on a day off. Otherwise, around the time of the bombing, I'd have been right here trying to catch a westbound Piccadilly line train. So many of us feel fortunate that fate intervened that day. But as well as the 52 who died, almost 800 were injured, and thousands of others will never forget what they saw. I ended up reporting live from the roof of my apartment building as the full horror of those events unfolded.
Looking down onto Russell Square, high up on a rooftop here, looking down onto Russell Square tube station at the moment. There's a row of about 20 ambulances immediately outside the tube station. Also, fire rescue vehicles, firefighters are down in Russell Square tube station itself. There are numerous, what are obviously doctors in these familiar orange boiler suits as well, either going down into the tunnel or emerging with casualties.
Those were murderous attacks on London, on our city, that affected so many people so deeply. I think it's really important 20 years on that our focus is on all of those people affected. The other thing my mind turns to are the emergency services and others who stepped forward on that day, and they and the families and the victims. What strikes me is how they're still carrying the effects of that day through to today and for the rest of their lives.
As well as the first suicide bombings, 7/7 marked the advent for the UK of more sophisticated terror cells aimed at causing so-called spectacular attacks. 2 decades on, the UK's most senior counter-terrorism officer says the threat picture has mostly moved away from the more sophisticated plots to an era of lone wolf attacks, individuals still willing to die for their twisted ideology and still looking to cause maximum harm.
So we still see the Islamist threat as our main threat here in the United Kingdom. And with an ever-increasing and unstable world as well, we do see terrorist groups overseas beginning to have an influence on terrorism threats in near Europe and of course here in the UK. So Islamist remains our main threat. And I think the online environment, the world environment, adds a whole new layer of challenge to the threat that we face.
I know it sounds a bit like a cliche, but I honestly can't believe that 20 years have passed since the horrors of the London bombings. A day when the 52 innocent lives represented here were so murderously cut short, and the lives of so many others forever changed. Mark White, GB News at the 7/7 Memorial.
Well, we can now speak with GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White, who is with us outside St Paul's Cathedral. Mark, it's been a long day for you. Thank you for hanging around and doing this hit. I wanted to speak to you one more time because today we've seen politicians, prime ministers, past and present, Tony Blair, Sadiq Khan, all calling for unity. Lessons must be learned. This must never happen again. Did we learn lessons from this, Mark White? Look at the London Bridge terror attack that came after. Look at the Westminster Bridge terror attack that came after. Have we really learned any lessons, Mark? Or is London still potentially facing a future terror threat?
Well, in terms of whether we face a future terror threat, there is no doubt the terror threat, although the actual level has not been raised, there is an uptick, a big uptick in the caseload that MI5 and counter-terrorism police are dealing with. 250 almost people were arrested for terrorist offences last year. That was a 5-year high. So there is no doubt that we face a very significant threat, and it is an Islamist terror threat. 75% of the casework that MI5 do is Islamist related. They talk about the far-right threat. There is a far-right threat there, but it pales in significance compared to that threat from Islamist terrorism. And it was interesting, you're right, watching those prime ministers past and present go in there, and it struck me that all of them have had to deal with these very significant mass casualty events for whatever the particular cause might have been at the time. Tony Blair dealt with 7/7, the 21/7 copycat attempted bombings. After that, the liquid bomb plot and so many other plots from Al-Qaeda were disrupted at that time. He said the lessons should be learned. Well, the lessons clearly weren't learned, because then we had the resurgence, or the emergence, I should say, of ISIS. And in that period of time, Theresa May, another Prime Minister who was represented here today at the service, she lived through the worst of ISIS here in the UK, with 2017 in particular being a year in which there were 6 terrorist attacks that were linked to ISIS at that time, including, of course, Ariana Grande in Manchester, that concert there, the London Bridge attacks, the Westminster Bridge attacks, and others. So the lessons weren't learned on that occasion as well. And then fast forward to where we are now, Martin, with the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and dealing with a mass casualty attack, this time in Southport. Well, he tells us that wasn't terrorism, even though the man eventually arrested and convicted of that was convicted of some terrorist offences as well. It's a different kind of threat now. It's more diverse. There are lone wolf actors out there trying to carry out what are often unsophisticated attacks using knives and cars. But the threat is there. The threat is very significant. Has the lesson been learned? Well, they're constantly, I think, trying to play catch up and trying to stay one step ahead of the emerging terror threat. But sadly, I think they're usually at least one step behind what that emerging threat is.
Well, Mark White, thank you for sticking around today. I know it's been a long and emotional day for you. I thought your package was fantastic. It really brought it home. It brought a lot of memories back. I lived in the area at the time. I remember feeling that bang in my chest. I lived a third of a mile away from Aldgate when that bomb went off. Mark White, thank you for today, and thanks for all you do for the channel. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. Well, let's continue the conversation now by speaking with the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, and that is Chip Chapman. Mr. Chapman, a pleasure to have you on the channel as ever. I may as well repeat my question there to Mark White, to you directly now. Do you think we have learned lessons? Have we really moved on, or is the threat of terror in Britain, and in particular on our busy transport networks, as great now as it was even 20 years ago?
I think it's slightly reduced, but of course there is a threat. The manifestation of that most obviously is that the threat level at the moment is substantial. For most of the period from 2000, it was severe, so that has gone down. And I don't think there's as much nostalgia as there was for Al-Qaeda and IS. The sort of notion of the caliphate was destroyed with the physical destruction of that in 2019, and there are no jihadi superstars out there. But having said that, the TSAT, which is the Terrorism Situation and Trend Report, which came out 2 years ago, would say that the threat within Europe, once again, is shaped by developments beyond the EU borders. That is Gaza and Russia. And it's that which continues to amplify violent extremism narratives. And it's that which drives radicalization and mobilization. And the really worrying thing, I think, is in the last set of statistics, which Mark sort of alluded to, 16% of those people who were arrested, it was 248, were under 17 years of age. And there's been a sort of intersection of those minors or young between the mental health problems, social isolation and digital dependency. And they seem to be at the moment the key enablers of radicalization. However, the ability to do complex plots, as 7/7 was, is massively reduced, which is why you see these days the lone actor attacks are attacks of weakness in a way. They're sort of bladed weapons or trying to do vehicle as a weapon. The difficulty these days of either getting a large plot together with bombs or ammunition and guns, you're likely to be discovered by the security agencies, because one of the things that was an outcome of 2017 and all the attacks then was a 256 recommendations, all implemented by CTC, Counter-Terrorist Command, and the Security Service. And now the TAC tip-offs, the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence means that the ability to discover is far greater.
Chip Chapman, can I ask you, I lived in the area around Aldgate East. I had at the time many interactions with armed officers, machine guns, fully tooled up. I've got to admit, I never felt safer in London. Is it time to arm our police so when these psychopaths take to our streets, they can be dealt with swiftly and efficiently?
Well, the response time of armed officers is actually phenomenally quick if you look at the statistics. And the other thing about the armed response units and their response time is the percentage of those that actually then lead to the discharge of weapons is incredibly low. So I don't think there's an argument there to arm routinely all the police in this country. The response time is always something that needs to be looked at, and the footprint of those armed response officers so they can agilely respond to where they're needed at the right time. And that's exactly what they do in Counter-Terrorist Command as well. You respond to the threat from wherever it comes, not the ideology.
OK, thank you very much for your expertise, as ever. And that's the former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Chip Chapman. Thank you for joining us.